Have you ever thought that a crime might not be about death but about absence? This is the story of a confession made from inside prison, where the criminal did not cry, did not tremble, did not hesitate. He simply wrote 3 pages, and he ended with one sentence. The problem wasn't what I did, it was what I let slip. A real case, cold for years, until a body was found in the basement of an abandoned school. The scene seemed too symbolic to be just a murder. The victim's face was partially disfigured, with one of his eyes sewn shut. There were no fingerprints, no cameras, nor any record of that boy's existence, just a wooden frame positioned on the floor, with a dry and disturbing phrase, "This is not a crime, it is an absence." But what left the police most silent was the second room discovered behind the false wall. An empty room, cold, and with signs that someone had been there for longer than necessary. Watch this video until the end, and you will get goosebumps. What you're about to discover may surprise you, because the true horror of this story has yet to be told. His name is Elliot Granger, but that doesn't matter so much. What matters is what he became when he stopped pretending he was just another teacher. At 39 years old, recently transferred to a high school in an unnamed city, Elliot carried perfection in his details and emptiness in his eyes. His co-workers described him as polite, organized, strangely kind. No one suspects anyone who never reacts. He lived alone in a rented apartment where every wall was covered in mirrors. This was not vanity. It was study, repetition, rehearsal. He didn't memorize texts. He copied people, voices, expressions, speech patterns. He had a notebook where he wrote down other people's dialogues word by word, as if they were sheet music. I always ate at the same time, sitting in the same position. He listened to conversations without appearing to be present. He recorded without anyone noticing. He wasn't impulsive. It never was. Each step was a reflection of another. He didn't kill out of anger. He switched off out of necessity. His fascination was not with other people's pain, but with perfect simulation. I wanted to know how far I could go to replace someone before the world noticed. And there, in that forgotten school, he saw his chance to prove it. But it was not yet time to act. First, it was necessary to find the ideal victim. Tyler Reeves wasn't popular or hated. He was invisible. And that's exactly what caught Elliot's attention. 17 years old, fatherless since he was 6, his mother in psychiatric treatment for over a decade. He lived with his grandmother, who rarely left the house. He had no history of disciplinary problems, no close friends, no mark that the world had left on him. But what really set him apart was the ritual. Every day at 12:16 sharp, Tyler would shuffle out of class, walk into the library, sit at the same corner table, and open the same book, a battered copy of Existential Philosophy, page 43. And there, for exactly 6 minutes and 20 seconds, he would just stare. Elliot observed this behavior for 27 days. He noted every movement, every tiny deviation in the tempo, every variation in the way Tyler breathed as he read. It wasn't the content that mattered. It was the pattern. It was the silence. Because for Elliot, a predictable person is an available person. And someone no one sees is someone no one will look for urgently. He didn't choose Tyler because he wanted to. He chose him because he knew. He knew Tyler didn't exist in many places anymore, and it was ready to be replaced. The simulation would start there. Behind the school was a structure that almost no one remembered, an annex built at the beginning of the last century, condemned for structural cracks and left to rot during decades of renovations. The principal said it was locked, but Elliot got the key, temporarily replacing the janitor. After an administrative request that no one questioned, no one suspects someone who solves small problems in silence. The place was covered in dust, smelling of rust, damp wood, and mold. Elliot didn't clean, just organized. He created an environment that looked abandoned, but functional. He removed everything that was movable. He covered the windows with MDF boards and sealed each gap with thick electrical tape. In the center of the room, He placed a black tarp over the uneven floor. On it, a circle drawn with coarse salt, white chalk and cement powder. On the walls, he pasted pages torn out of school notebooks, all with the same handwritten sentence. This isn't real, but it's not a lie either. An old projector was reinstalled on the ceiling, connected to a timer. The lights turned on and off at 90-second intervals. And the most meticulous detail, a fake mirror built into the wooden wall, allowing Elliot to watch everything without being seen. A silent observation point. No cameras. No audio. Just the reflection. Nothing here was improvised. Everything there was a stage. And the play hadn't started yet. Elliot knew that proximity wasn't presence. It was repetition. It was reflex. For the first few days, he started going to the library at the same times as Tyler. He would sit a few tables back, pick out random books, and just watch. When Tyler stood up, Elliot stood up. When Tyler hesitated at the bookshelf, Elliot hesitated. Small mirrorings, micro movements. On. The 10th day, they passed each other in the hallway. Tyler said, "Excuse me," and Elliot replied, "Excuse me," with the same intonation. The next day, Tyler dropped a bookmark. Elliot returned it without saying anything, but with the same look. Silence was the bond. On the 20th day, Elliot made his move. He sat down at the table next to them. He pretended to be reading the same book. Tyler looked over. Elliot didn't smile. He just said, "That page is weird, isn't it?" Tyler nodded. Not understanding the reason for the coincidence, but he didn't question it. From then on, Elliot sat next to him every day. Sometimes he would talk. Sometimes he would just repeat what Tyler said. A human reflex, quiet, familiar. Until one Friday, Elliot said, "There's something in the back of the school. You should see it. It's bizarre." Tyler hesitated. Then he said, "Okay." Because when trust is built in the mirror, the invitation sounds like an echo, and echoes don't scare. They just repeat. The door creaked as if begging not to be closed, but Elliot locked it anyway. The sound of the key turning echoed through the empty room like a signal only he recognized. Tyler took 2 steps and stopped. The floor creaked differently here. The light was dim but calculated, cold, sharp, artificial. "What is this place?" Tyler asked. Elliot responded with just a gesture, pointing to the center of the canvas. Tyler hesitated, but it walked. He didn't see the mirror built into the wall. He didn't realize he was in the exact center of the circle. He didn't even notice the slight change in Elliot's breathing. The handkerchief was pressed against his face with precise force, neither brute nor hesitant. The inhaled compound had no distinct odor. It simply acted. In less than 15 seconds, his body was no longer struggling. Tyler fell to his knees, then slumped sideways, soundless, unresisting. Elliot watched him for 30 seconds before moving. Timed. He tied the arms and legs with strips of fabric. He positioned the head exactly where it should be, and he turned on the projector. The alternating lights created shadows that moved like figures. From that moment on, the real experiment began. Tyler woke up an hour later, confused, slowed down. Elliot, on the other side of the mirror, recorded every second. He narrated each micro-expression. I was testing the transition. Death had not yet begun. Because what he wanted was to erase the self from within. Before erasing the body, Tyler didn't die that day, or the next. Elliot took his time. For 4 days, he entered the isolated room at the same time each day. He observed. He took notes. He repeated. While Tyler, tied up, wavered between consciousness and induced delirium, Elliot tested patterns, phrases, slang, intonations. Every detail of the victim's identity was absorbed like a new language. During breaks, Elliot dressed like Tyler. He wore his sweatshirt, his cap, his backpack. He walked the school corridors. With his head down, his steps identical. Nobody noticed, nobody found it strange, because no one really looked at Tyler before that. When he decided to end the process, Elliot did so as if he were turning off a light. One last sedative, no pain, no visible physical trauma. The body was cleaned with tissues soaked in hydrogen peroxide. The eyes were closed. The mouth was sewn shut with surgical thread in 3 places. Then he set the scene. In the basement, where he would leave the body, Elliot positioned the victim on a new, clean tarp, hands crossed over the chest. Next to it, a wooden frame with a knife-carved phrase, "This is not a crime. It is an absence." There was no visible blood, no fingerprints, not a hair out of place. It all seemed too symbolic to be random, and that was exactly what he wanted, a perfect installation, but incomplete, because the most important piece was still missing, the second room. He didn't bury the body. It wouldn't be consistent with what he had built. To bury it would be to hide it, and Elliot didn't want to hide anything. He wanted to display it, not as a trophy but as an enigma. The basement of the old school was the setting, a cold space with a cracked concrete floor and the smell of rust. There, Tyler's body was laid out with geometric precision, as if it belonged in a silent gallery. The canvas was stretched until it was wrinkle-free. The victim's head rested on a closed book, the same one Tyler was reading in the library, open. To page 43. Next to the body, a melted candle but never lit. In the opposite corner of the room, an empty chair facing the wall. And, in the center of Tyler's chest, a piece of fabric with a word stitched on it. Replicated. Nothing there seemed rushed or emotional. The second bedroom next door was left almost empty. Almost. There was a broken mirror leaning against the floor, with handprints in the dust, an old tape recorder still on, and on the ceiling, rusty hooks, apparently unused. But the most disturbing thing was not in the scenery. He was absent. Elliot removed all of Tyler's personal items, backpack, cell phone, notebooks, sneakers. He took it with him. He started using them. During the following days, he lived as he did, signed school papers, spoke to teachers, smile with the same corner of your mouth, while the real Tyler artistically rotted beneath the school. No coffin, no prayer, because that wasn't a burial. It was a manifesto. The routine began to break down on the 9th day. Tyler, the original, was nowhere to be found in the library, but the book on page 43 kept getting moved. No one noticed this, except the librarian, Mr. Keller, a methodical, quiet man, obsessed with patterns. He knew how many times each book was checked out. He knew who returned books with fingerprints, creased covers, and the smell of lunch. And that book, Tyler's, had something new. At the bottom of page 43, someone had written in tiny, pressed letters, "He's in." At first, Keller thought it was vandalism, erased it with an eraser. 2 days later, the phrase was back. Same letter, same place, same pressure. He took the book to the director. At first, she ignored it, but the librarian insisted. He asked them to look at the cameras. That's when they noticed something strange. Tyler didn't appear in any recent images. There was someone with his backpack, but the resolution was low. His face was always hidden. His walk was similar, but the time was out of sync. The principal decided to check on the absences. They discovered that Tyler had not answered calls for almost 2 weeks, but the teachers believed they had seen him. That's when they called the police. The sniffer dogs scoured the grounds. One stopped in front of the old cellar. It growled. The door was unlocked. The smell was muffled. When they entered, they saw the body, the mirror, the book, and the frame with the phrase, "This is not a crime. It is an absence." The scene was too static, too cold. It felt like a ritual. But what disturbed the agents most was what was on the other side of the false wall. A second room, empty, except for one detail, a piece of dirty mirror with a fingerprint on it. But it wasn't Tyler's. It was from someone who was still inside the school, watching everything. Elliot didn't run away. He didn't try to hide it. When the police arrived at the school, he was sitting in the library at the same table where Tyler usually sat. The book opened on page 43. The same. Position as always. Same head angle, same time of silence. The agents called his name. He didn't respond right away. He looked slowly, as if calculating the delay in his reaction. Then he closed the book and just said, "You arrived before the next one." It was conducted without resistance. Not a word during the journey, no tremors, no expression of guilt. At the police station, he kept his gaze fixed on the reflection in the interrogation room mirror. I ignored the questions, but he whispered. Snippets of lines, Tyler said in the library. Disconnected words, but with identical intonations. Hours later, he started talking, but not like Elliot, like Tyler. He knew his grandmother's name, mother's medications, favorite subjects, the exact position where you sat in each room. The deputy said, "You are not him." Elliot smiled without showing his teeth. He was nobody. I just shaped him. As investigators mapped out the basement scene, Elliot remained under surveillance. But his presence, there seemed decorative. Because in his apartment, the police found something worse. A wall covered in 3x4 photos with names crossed out, and only one image still intact. It wasn't Tyler's. It was from a girl, still alive, not yet replaced. And then, finally, they understood. Elliot was not silent. I was waiting. The confession was not requested. It was offered. 3 days after his arrest, Elliot asked for a pen and blank sheets of paper. He wrote in tiny, even handwriting slanting slightly to the left. 3 pages. No erasures, no adjectives, just facts. It began with a dry sentence. The self is a trained repetition. He described the process with clinical precision. How I observed speech patterns, gestures, pauses. How I trained my breathing cadence until it felt authentic. He reported using mirrors for months, repeating Tyler's phrases until he internalized them as if they were his own. He said the intention was never to kill. It was replaced. Death was just the side. The effect of the complete simulation. He explained the basement, the mirror, the empty room. He said he needed a silent witness, hence the tape recorder. But he did not reveal the contents of the tapes. He said the body was not displayed out of vanity. It was displayed for aesthetic coherence. The team of forensic psychologists remained silent for long minutes after reading the last page. She said, "It was the first attempt, a sketch, a primary mold, but the next one is almost ready." When asked who was next, Elliot just nodded, and she answered in a girl's voice, low, scared, identical to the photo found on the wall. The room froze. No by the answer, but for sure. He had already started. Again. What had seemed like an isolated case began to unravel within a week. The photos found in Elliot's apartment were uploaded to a national database. Of the 19 images, 11 belonged to real students. 3 were missing. 2 died in circumstances that had previously been ruled a suicide. None of these connections had been made before. But it was the last image, the intact one, that made everything fall apart. The girl's name was Elise Thorne, 15 years. He lived in another state. He never had any contact with Elliot, as far as they knew. But when police went to her school, they found the same pattern. A substitute teacher had shown up the month before, with a different name. Clean history. When they showed the photo to Elise, she froze. He said that man had praised his notebook. Just that. But I repeated the phrase in the same way 3 days later. The police returned to question Elliot. He smiled when he heard Elise's name, but he didn't confirm anything. He just recited, "Repetition precedes identity." In the school basement, a new detail was discovered. Behind the mirror, a second tape, hidden under the loose floor. On the recording, there was no Tyler's voice. No, but Elliot. But from a third person, a feminine, young, nervous voice, whispering disjointed phrases as if rehearsing someone. Experts are still analyzing the origin of the audio, but one excerpt was clear. If I repeat it enough, they'll forget I'm someone else. And then the confession sentence made sense. The problem wasn't what I did, it was what I blurted out. Because Elliot knew that not everything was erased, something survived, something followed. And you might be talking to someone right now, with your voice. Elliot has been in an isolation cell since the tapes were revealed. He hasn't spoken in days. He only moves to repeat gestures he learned from others. Braid your fingers, rub your nose with the back of your left hand, blink twice before looking at someone. These are copied patterns, fragments of other identities, as if he were still training or waiting. The investigation is still ongoing, but the list of names on the wall of his apartment is no longer the agent's biggest fear. What keeps them up at night is the name that no "it's" on the wall. The next victim, the next mold, the next absence. The recorder hidden under the mirror was restored by experts. At the end of the tape, there is a muffled sound, followed by a phrase that does not match Elliot's voice, nor Tyler's, nor Elise's. A distorted voice, low but clear enough to freeze any certainty. I am the copy. But he has already become something else. The problem was never what he did. That's what he blurted out. Because this is still loose. And it might be too close. Maybe even repeat your words, smile your way, and be training us with your image. If this made you look twice in the mirror, leave a like, comment here, silence copies everything, and subscribe to the channel, because in the next video, you'll meet someone who confessed before even committing the crime. And he was arrested by prediction.